Is it
Oh
safe?
my
I will
God.
protect you.
Promise?
I promise.
It began as an ordinary royal afternoon, quiet corridors, familiar faces, trusted routines. But somewhere between the palace gates and a child's innocent smile, a dangerous plan was already in motion. Princess Charlotte never saw it coming. Neither did most of the palace. Yet one royal guard felt it, the slightest detail out of place, a chill where there shouldn't be one. What followed was a race against time, loyalty tested under pressure, and a truth so unsettling it shook the very heart of royal security. Could one sharp instinct really save a future queen? If stories like this pull you in, stories that reveal the unseen courage behind palace walls, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves royal history with a human heartbeat. Your support helps keep these powerful, untold stories alive. The palace woke the way it always did, quietly, precisely, almost ceremonially. Sunlight slid across stone corridors polished smooth by centuries of footsteps. Staff moved with practiced grace. Nothing felt rushed, nothing felt wrong. And that was exactly why no one noticed the danger creeping in. Princess Charlotte's laughter echoed briefly through a private garden, light and unguarded, the sound of a child enjoying a rare moment without cameras or ceremony. She was still young enough that the weight of history hadn't settled on her shoulders yet. To her, the palace wasn't a symbol of monarchy or power. It was home. A place with hidden corners, friendly faces, and rules that felt more like suggestions than laws. Prince William and Catherine had worked hard to give their children that sense of normality, as normal as royal life could be. Anyway, Charlotte attended lessons, played with her brothers, asked curious questions, and sometimes complained softly about things most children complained about. Shoes that pinched, lessons that felt too long, adults who talked around her instead of to her. On this particular afternoon, the plan was simple. A short walk through a secured section of the palace grounds. Fresh air, a change of scenery. Nothing extraordinary. The kind of routine that lulled everyone into comfort. Everyone except one. Royal guards are trained to see what others don't, to notice patterns, to feel when something, however small, breaks the rhyme. It's not paranoia. It's survival instinct sharpened by years of discipline. As Charlotte skipped ahead, a few steps beyond her assigned position, one guard's eyes followed not just her movement, but the space around her. The way shadows fell. The way a staff member lingered half a second too long near a service archway. The way another guard adjusted his stance, just slightly off protocol. Individually, none of it mattered. Together, it whispered. The palace relied on layers of security. Background checks, rotating shifts, restricted access zones, cameras watching every corridor. It was one of the most protected places on Earth, and yet history had taught them a brutal lesson: threats didn't always come from outside the walls. Sometimes they wore familiar faces. Charlotte paused to examine a flower, crouching down with total focus, as if the world beyond the petals didn't exist. Her innocence was striking, disarming, and dangerously vulnerable. The guard adjusted his earpiece, pretending to listen to a routine update. In truth, he was checking for confirmation that never came. A silence where there should have been reassurance. A delay that stretched a heartbeat too long. Control. Confirm green status, he murmured. A pause, then a response. Normal words. Normal tone. To normal. The walk continued. Inside the palace, staff prepared for the next engagement. Phones buzzed quietly. Doors opened and closed. Life moved forward, unaware that it was brushing past a carefully laid plan. Charlotte turned back toward the adults, waving with a grin that melted even the hardest expressions. She trusted the world completely. Why wouldn't she? Every day of her life had taught her that she was safe. That trust weighed heavy. The guard scanned again. The service archway, clear. The pathway ahead, clear. But something lingered, a sense that the pieces on the board were shifting, subtly, deliberately. Security routines existed for a reason. Predictability was both their strength and their weakness. Routes repeated, schedules refined, efficiency perfected. And someone somewhere had studied it all. Charlotte's foot caught briefly on the stone. She didn't fall, but the guard stepped forward instinctively, closing the distance without making it obvious. He didn't touch her. He didn't alarm anyone. But he moved just enough to change the formation. That small adjustment mattered more than anyone realized. Behind the scenes, a door that should have remained locked stood ajar for exactly 12 seconds longer than protocol allowed. A maintenance log showed nothing unusual. A camera angle shifted for routine calibration. No red flags, no alarms. Yet danger doesn't always announce itself with noise. Sometimes it waits quietly, confident that no one is looking. Charlotte straightened, brushing dust from her hands. "Did you see that one?" she asked, pointing at a flower. The guard smiled politely, nodding, while his eyes never stopped moving. He had seen it, and far more. Royal children are taught early, subtly, gently, that their lives are not their own. That safety sometimes means distance. That trust must be earned again and again. But Charlotte was still too young for those lessons. And that made this moment all the more fragile. As the group prepared to head back inside, the guard felt it again, stronger now. The sensation that the window was closing. He glanced at his watch. Timing was tight, too tight. Inside the palace walls, someone was counting on everyone doing exactly what they always did. Charlotte took one last look at the garden before turning away, unaware that this simple afternoon walk had already drawn a line between before and after. The guard subtly changed position again, placing himself just half a step closer than regulations required. To anyone watching, it looked like nothing. To him, it was a decision that could not be undone, because somewhere within those ancient walls, a plan was unfolding, quiet, calculated, and terrifyingly patient.
That small adjustment mattered more than anyone realized. Behind the scenes, a door that should have remained locked stood ajar for exactly 12 seconds longer than protocol allowed. A maintenance log showed nothing unusual. A camera angle shifted for routine calibration. No red flags. No alarms. Yet danger doesn't always announce itself with noise. Sometimes it waits quietly, confident that no one is looking. Charlotte straightened, brushing dust from her hands. "Did you see that one?" she asked, pointing at a flower. The guard smiled politely, nodding, while his eyes never stopped moving. Yes, he had seen it, and far more. Royal children are taught early, subtly, gently, that their lives are not their own, that safety sometimes means distance, that trust must be earned again and again. But Charlotte was still too young for those lessons, and that made this moment all the more fragile. As the group prepared to head back inside, the guard felt it again, stronger now, the sensation that the window was closing. He glanced at his watch. Timing was tight, too tight. Inside the palace walls, someone was counting on everyone doing exactly what they always did. Charlotte took one last look at the garden before turning away, unaware that this simple afternoon walk had already drawn a line between before and after. The guard subtly changed position again, placing himself just half a step closer than regulations required. To anyone watching, it looked like nothing. To him, it was a decision that could not be undone, because somewhere within those ancient walls, a plan was unfolding, quiet, calculated, and terrifyingly patient. And the only thing standing between that plan and a child who trusted the world was one guard who refused to ignore a feeling he couldn't quite explain. He had learned long ago that instincts didn't shout. They whispered, and the most dangerous mistake a royal guard could make was confusing silence for safety. From the outside, he was indistinguishable from the others, uniform immaculate, posture precise, expression neutral. Years of training had carved discipline into muscle memory. But beneath that calm exterior lived a mind that never truly rested. It cataloged movement, measured distance, noted patterns the way others notice weather. This guard had been raised on routine, drilled on protocol, conditioned to believe that order kept people alive. Yet experience had taught him something just as important. Danger often hid behind familiarity. He had seen it before, a decade earlier, during a foreign visit. A single misplaced vehicle had nearly triggered an international incident. Another time, a well-meaning aide had unknowingly carried an unverified device into a restricted zone. Close calls didn't make headlines. They made guards cautious. And cautious guards survived. As Princess Charlotte re-entered the palace corridor, the guard slowed his pace just enough to observe who didn't adjust with him. 2 staff members fell into step instantly. One did not. It wasn't obvious. It never was. The man wore standard palace credentials. His movements were calm, rehearsed. Too rehearsed. He kept his gaze lowered, respectful, blending into the background the way palace staff were trained to do. But there was a hesitation when he reached the security threshold, a fraction of a second where his foot paused before crossing. That hesitation echoed. The guard's mind raced through possibilities. New staff? Shift change? Approved contractor? All explanations existed. All reasonable. But reasonable didn't always mean safe. He tapped his earpiece again, requesting a secondary confirmation. This time, the reply came faster. Efficient. Reassuring. Still wrong. Charlotte skipped ahead again, tugging lightly at her sleeve, absorbed in a story she was telling herself. Children had a way of making time feel harmless. But time was the one thing the guard didn't have. The corridor narrowed slightly as they approached a junction that split toward private quarters. It was a transitional zone, secure, but less visible, a place where routines overlapped, where staff and security intersected. The guard adjusted his position deliberately, angling his body to block one line of sight while appearing to simply shift weight. To anyone else, it looked like nothing. To him, it was chess. The man with the lowered gaze slowed. That was the moment. The guard's heart rate didn't spike. Training prevented that. Instead, clarity set in, the kind that arrived when all the noise fell away and only decisions remained. He stepped forward, voice calm. Credential check. The man looked up just briefly. Surprise flickered across his face before it vanished. He smiled, offering the badge with practiced ease. Everything about it looked correct. And that was the problem. Authentic credentials aged naturally. Edges softened. Micro scratches accumulated. This one was too clean. Too perfect. Issued recently or replicated. The guard didn't react. He handed it back with a nod, as if satisfied. Thank you. He let the man pass. That choice would haunt him for exactly 3 seconds. Because the moment the man moved beyond the guard's peripheral vision, the air shifted. The subtle tension snapped into certainty. The guard turned sharply. Hold. The man froze. Charlotte stopped too, turning with confusion. What's happening? The guard smiled down at her, warm and reassuring. Nothing at all. Just a quick check. But his eyes were already scanning for movement, for accomplices, for escape routes. The man's hand twitched toward his jacket. In the palace, chaos didn't erupt. It never did. Royal security didn't panic. It closed in. 2 guards appeared from nowhere, positioning themselves without a word. The corridor felt suddenly smaller. Sir, the guard said evenly, please step aside. The man's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked, not to the guards, but toward Charlotte. That glance said everything. The guard moved instantly, placing himself between the man and the child. No hesitation. No doubt. This was no random breach. This was targeted. Charlotte sensed a change. Her smile faded. Children noticed tone, before words. Did I do something wrong? No, the guard said softly, without looking back. You didn't. The man bolted. What followed was fast but controlled. A grab at the wrist. A struggle contained within seconds. No shouting. No spectacle. Just practice efficiency. As the man was restrained, something slipped from his jacket pocket and clattered onto the floor. A device. Small. Unassuming. Wrong. The guard's breath caught, not in fear but realization. This hadn't been an impulsive act. It was planned, carefully, quietly. Someone had studied schedules, routines, access points. Someone had believed the system would protect them. Charlotte was quickly ushered away by another guard, her hand held firmly but gently. She looked back once. Confusion etched across her face. The guard met her eyes and gave a small nod, a promise without words. "You're safe. For now." As the man was escorted out, the weight of what nearly happened settled in. The palace would handle the fallout. Investigations would follow. Reports would be written. But one truth remained unavoidable. If the guard had ignored that hesitation, if he had trusted routine over instinct, history would have read very differently. And somewhere beyond those walls, the true mastermind was still watching, realizing that a perfect plan had failed by the smallest margin imaginable. The palace returned to its calm far too quickly. That was the unsettling part. Within minutes, corridors were cleared, routines quietly adjusted, and Princess Charlotte was safely back under close protection. To an outsider, nothing seemed out of place. No alarms blared. No headlines flashed. No dramatic evacuation unfolded. The monarchy had perfected this art over centuries. How to absorb a shock without letting the world feel the tremor. But behind closed doors, the atmosphere shifted. The restrained man sat alone in a secure holding room, his confidence already draining away. He wasn't panicking. Not yet. But his silence spoke louder than any confession. This was not someone acting on impulse. He was waiting, measuring, calculating how much had truly gone wrong. The royal guard who stopped him stood outside, arms crossed, replaying every second in his mind. Training demanded review, not relief, because stopping the messenger didn't mean the message was gone. The device recovered from the floor was now sealed, examined by specialists. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't a tracker. It was worse in a quieter way, an encrypted communication relay. Short range, highly specific, designed to activate only under precise conditions. Conditions that had almost been met. This wasn't about chaos. It wasn't about headlines. It was about access. Someone wanted proximity. Someone wanted leverage. Inside a secure briefing room, senior security officials gathered. The tone was low, serious. No raised voices. Just facts laid out like pieces of a puzzle no one liked seeing completed. The man's credentials? Authentic enough to pass casual inspection. The access window? Narrow but deliberate. The route Charlotte walked? One of the few with predictable overlap between staff and security. None of this was accidental. This was rehearsed. One official said quietly, "Weeks, maybe months." The guard listened, jaw tight. He had felt that truth before it was spoken. What unsettled everyone wasn't how close the plan came to success, but how elegant it was. No brute force. No dramatic breach. Just patience. Familiarity. Trust turned into camouflage. Meanwhile, Princess Charlotte sat with her mother, unaware of the full gravity of what had occurred. She sensed tension, of course. Children always did. Catherine spoke softly, reassuringly, explaining only that there had been a security mix-up. Charlotte nodded, accepting the answer on the surface. But something lingered in her eyes, a quiet question she didn't yet have the words to ask. Why did everyone look different all of a sudden? Prince William stood nearby, listening as details filtered in. His expression didn't change much. It didn't need to. He understood better than most what it meant to live under constant protection, and how fragile that protection could feel when tested. Back in the holding room, the man finally spoke. "I wasn't meant to touch her," he said flatly. The interrogator paused. "You were close enough. That was the point." A pause hung heavy in the air. "Who sent you?" The man smiled faintly. Not smug, resigned. "You won't like the answer." The truth emerged slowly, layer by layer. This wasn't the work of a lone actor. It wasn't even ideological in the traditional sense. It was influence-driven, power-seeking. Someone believed that proximity to a royal child, even briefly, could open doors that money and status never could. A photograph, a moment, A manufactured narrative. Leverage. The mastermind never intended to harm Charlotte physically. That was what made it so chilling. The threat wasn't violence. It was control. And that realization sent a deeper wave of unease through the room. Because preventing harm was one thing. Preventing manipulation was another entirely. The guard felt anger rise, not loud, not explosive, but steady, controlled. He thought of Charlotte crouched over a flower, completely unaware that she had been viewed as an asset, a tool. That line between innocence and exploitation was one he would never accept being crossed. Security protocols were already shifting. Routes changed. Access lists tightened. Predictability erased. The palace adapted, as it always did. But there was an unspoken understanding now. The system had nearly been beaten. Only one variable hadn't followed the script. Human instinct. The guard was called into a private debrief. No praise. No dramatics. Just acknowledgement. In this world, survival was a reward. You trusted your gut, one official said. I trusted the pattern break, the guard replied. That answer mattered, because patterns could be studied, systems could be mapped, but the human element, the refusal to ignore a feeling that couldn't yet be proven, that was harder to defeat. As night fell over the palace, lights dimmed, and the day's events were quietly locked away from public view, Charlotte slept peacefully, unaware of how close the world had come to rewriting her story. But somewhere beyond the palace walls, someone else was wide awake. The mastermind now knew two things for certain. The plan had been discovered, and the margin for error was gone. The game wasn't over. It had only changed. The palace never truly slept. It only breathed more slowly. Long after Princess Charlotte drifted into peaceful dreams, the machinery of royal security kept turning. Quiet footsteps, low conversations, eyes trained on screens glowing softly in the dark. The events of the day had passed, but their meaning was still unfolding. For the royal guard who had stepped forward when instinct told him to, rest did not come easily. He stood watch in a different corridor now, one with new access rules and altered patrol timing. Everything had changed, even if it looked the same. That was the paradox of protection. When it worked, no one noticed. Investigators worked through the night, tracing communications, mapping connections, following financial threads that stretched far beyond palace grounds. The man who had been detained was no mastermind. He was a courier, a disposable piece, skilled enough to blend in, replaceable enough to be sacrificed. The real architect of the plan had never intended to step inside the palace, and that was what made the threat so modern and so dangerous. By morning, a clearer picture emerged. The attempt wasn't designed to shock the public. It was meant to whisper, to plant doubt, to create a narrative that could be shaped later, sold quietly, weaponized subtly. One moment, one image, one harmless interaction, just enough to suggest access, just enough to suggest influence. That was a world the monarchy now navigated, where power didn't always come of force, and danger didn't always wear a mask. Prince William sat through the final briefing with a steady focus. When it ended, he asked only one question. How close? The room fell silent. Too close, someone finally answered. He nodded. He didn't need more detail. Later that day, he crossed paths with a guard in a private corridor. No cameras, no ceremony, just two men who understood responsibility from different angles. Thank you, William said simply. The guard inclined his head. Just doing my duty, sir. But both men knew the truth. Duty alone wasn't what made the difference. It was a willingness to act before certainty arrived. Princess Charlotte never knew the full story. She didn't need to. Childhood was meant to be protected, not burdened with shadows. She went back to her lessons, her laughter, her questions about the world. But something had shifted in the way adults moved around her, more alert, more deliberate, more aware of what was at stake. At one point, days later, she recognized the guard and waved. He smiled back. It was a small moment, but it carried weight, because he knew how close that smile had come to being stolen by something darker. Security reforms followed quietly. New protocols, new rotations, less predictability. More human judgment built into the system. The palace didn't just respond, it evolved. And that evolution sent a message far beyond its walls. To anyone watching, to anyone planning, to anyone who believed patience alone could outsmart vigilance. The system could be studied, but people were unpredictable. The mastermind was never publicly named. Some stories never were. But sources suggested the plan had been abandoned entirely. Its value lost the moment it failed. Influence, after all, depended on secrecy, and secrecy had been broken. For the guard, life returned to routine. That was how it always went. No medals, no interviews, just another post, another watch. But some moments stayed with you. Years later, when Charlotte would stand taller, more aware of the world around her, she might never remember this day. But its impact would still shape her life. Seen in the layers of protection, the careful planning, the unseen guardians who ensured her path forward remained hers alone. History often celebrated kings and queens. Rarely did it remember the hands that kept them safe. This was one of those moments that would never make a textbook, never trend, never be publicly acknowledged. But it mattered, because on an ordinary day that nearly wasn't, one royal guard noticed what others missed, trusted a feeling he couldn't yet explain, and chose action over assumption. And in doing so, he ensured that a little girl could grow up without ever knowing how close the world came to changing her story. Sometimes, the most powerful victories are the ones that happen quietly, just in time. Years later, people will look back on Princess Charlotte's childhood and see only photographs, bright smiles, confident waves, moments frozen in time. They would see a young royal growing into a role with grace and ease. What they would never see were the countless near misses, the silent corrections, the invisible hands guiding danger way before it ever had a name. That afternoon became one of those invisible moments. Inside the palace, life moved forward. Public schedules resumed. Ceremonies continued. Smiles returned to their familiar places. To the world, nothing had happened, and that, in royal security, was the highest measure of success. But for those who knew, the memory lingered. The royal guard returned to his post, uniform crisp, posture unchanged. If anyone expected him to carry the weight of heroism on his shoulders, they would have been disappointed. He didn't speak about the incident. He didn't replay it aloud. He stored where guards stored everything that mattered, deep inside, filed under lessons learned. Because one truth had become painfully clear. The greatest threat wasn't chaos. It wasn't noise. It was confidence. The belief that systems alone were enough. In the weeks that followed, quiet reforms reshaped palace security. Not dramatic ones. No sweeping announcements. Instead, subtle shifts designed to break predictability. Routes changed without pattern. Access windows varied. Human judgment was given more authority than rigid timing. Machines could monitor. Protocols could guide. But people could decide. That philosophy became the unseen legacy of the day Princess Charlotte almost became a pawn in someone else's game. Charlotte herself carried on, blissfully unaware. She grew taller, louder, more curious. She asked sharper questions. She noticed more than people expected. And sometimes, just sometimes, she would look at the guards and smile, as if sensing something she couldn't explain. Children had instincts too. One afternoon, months later, she asked her mother a simple question. Why are there always so many people watching? Catherine paused, choosing her words carefully. Because you matter. Charlotte thought about that for a moment. Everyone matters. Yes, her mother replied softly. That's true. It was the closest explanation she would ever need. Behind the scenes, the mastermind's world unraveled quietly. Influence networks depended on trust, secrecy, and leverage. When one thread snapped, others followed. Contacts grew cautious. Doors closed. The plan, once so carefully designed, lost its value overnight. Failure in silence was still failure. And somewhere far from the palace, someone learned a hard lesson. Even the most calculated schemes could be undone by a single human instinct refusing to stay quiet. For the royal guard, recognition never came publicly. It never did. That wasn't the culture. That wasn't the point. Protection was anonymous by design. The less the world knew, the safer the system remained. But among his peers, there was a knowing respect, a subtle nod, a shared understanding. He had done what guards were meant to do. He had noticed. Years would pass. Princess Charlotte would step into larger roles, her presence steady, her confidence natural. Commentators would praise her composure. Historians would speak of continuity, of stability, of the monarchy adapting to modern times. None of them would mention the day when everything could have shifted. And that was exactly how it should be. Because the strongest shields were the ones you never saw. The palace would face new challenges, new threats, new tests. It always did. But the lesson remained etched into its foundations. Systems mattered, but people mattered more. The guard eventually retired, his service marked quietly, respectfully. On his final day, he walked the corridors one last time. The same stone, the same light, the same sense of responsibility. Even without the uniform. As he left, he glanced back, not with pride but with calm. The job had never been about recognition. It had been about moments, about timing, about standing between danger and someone who trusted the world. And somewhere within those ancient walls, a young royal continued to grow up safe, unburdened by a story she would never know, but would always benefit from. History would remember kings, queens, and crowns. But on that ordinary day that almost wasn't, history was quietly protected by someone who understood a simple truth. Sometimes, the fate of the future doesn't change with a grand gesture. Sometimes, it changes because one person paid attention, just in time,